They always introduce me as the town historian. Well, I'm not really a historian. I'm kind of a folklorist, I guess, because I think when you say historian, you're held to a higher standard. I didn't want to go there, so I like the myths, the stories, the legends, that type of thing I like just as well. So that's kind of what I wanted to share with you today, because I think it's some fun. It's just fun. So, and I very much enjoy this. We had a motto, Fircrest, life at 25 miles an hour. When we had the water tower, we were gonna, it used to say just Fircrest, and we were gonna put this on there with a giant 25-mile-an-hour speed limit sign on the water tower, but we ended up getting a really nice design from somebody in town, so I got over-trumped on this, but I think we had 3 votes. We didn't get the 4th one, but it would have been fun, but I really like what was up there. Andrew Imholt, I think, his sister put together that logo for us, which was beautifully done. Anyway, I'm gonna start out with kind of a little history about Fircrest and some of the things I'm gonna do it kind of chronologically. And the one I wanted to start with was this guy. This is the brains and who is responsible for making our community the way it is today. His name is George Washington Thompson, and he was the founder of University Place. And George brought his family out here from Illinois and came and settled in this area. He was actually in the Civil War, and he was an officer in the 25th Regiment, which was it was a black regiment in the Civil War. And he was one of the officers of that unit. He is also a very close personal friend with John Greenleaf Whittier, Whittier School. He was a very close friend, and it's no coincidence that we have our school named John Greenleaf Whittier because of this man. So that's something that we can attribute probably to him too. Now, he was a lumberman when he came to Tacoma and very much a developer. He was the 2nd president of the Chamber of Commerce for the city of Tacoma. And he was also very involved in the Methodist Church. And he donated land for churches. He was very supportive of the church community. And he wanted to build a college at University Place. And it eventually became the University of Puget Sound. But his idea was, as a developer, I'm going to develop a whole area of town, and with the profits I make selling the lots, I'm going to build the college. And that's how we're going to fund it and make it work. And one of the first things he had to do was to build transportation out here so that he could bring people out to this part of the city. And we were kind of, I guess, in the suburbs. And he applied with the city of Tacoma for a franchise to be the streetcar line that would come out here and serve the western part of Pierce County. There were 2 others. Alan Mason had the franchise for the north end of Tacoma, and he did around Point Defiance and around Mason School, all that. And Rodabaugh had the one going south. He went all the way out to Wapato. And anyway, they were given these franchises, and they had to show improvement and work, and they thought this would be a great way to have people that live out in the suburbs can get into the cities and work to the stores and get to their jobs, but also live out here where it may be more peaceful. And so he had the franchise. And one of the problems was he was busy with this development, and he kind of forgot about working on this franchise. He had to show improvements before they would give him this thing after a year. He had to have improvement. He hadn't done anything. He was working on the lots. So he had heard the night before a city council meeting that they were going to pull his franchise. And he was not going to be able to build his, because he hadn't had any work started yet. And when he found out, he panicked and he called up all of his friends. He was in the lumber industry, and every lumber yard in Tacoma all night long made railroad ties, just kicking them out everywhere he could. Every shop was doing them, working them in, and they went out and laid them over the whole 12.2 miles from Tacoma all the way out to Steilacoom, and laid all these railroad ties along the way. And the next morning, he shows up at that council meeting, and they said, "I'm sorry, we got to pull that franchise. You haven't done any work yet." "What do you mean I haven't done any work? I got railroad ties all the way to Steilacoom. We've already done it." And saved that franchise that one night, kind of panicking in there. So pretty industrious guy, perhaps. And when he tried to build that college, by the way, he hired the guy named Schwargel who built Tacoma's Wrights Park with Bird Lake, all that stuff. He designed his college for him too. That was Schwargel, the same guy that Tacoma used to build the first Wrights Park. And that streetcar line that he made, that was 12.2 miles long, no one was supposed to make a line more than 4 miles. They didn't think it was possible. He made one 12.2 miles. So it was the longest in the world in 1891. And look how beautiful this was. Look at that streetcar going across Chambers down there at the bottom of the hill on Chambers Creek. And beautiful just how they made this thing work. And like I say, the powerhouse for this is located on 12th and Proctor. Do you know where that is? On 12th and Proctor, there's that trolley barn. That's where a lot of the electrical work and stuff that would keep this line running through there, and the little shop where he'd work on the trolleys. But it was kind of an amazing accomplishment to have a streetcar line, the longest in the world, and it was called the Thompson-Abbott line. So he actually kind of went broke during the Depression in 1893 and couldn't get this college to go. He ended up selling the land. And he went up to Alaska and tried to make his fortune in the gold rush. And up in Ketchikan, he was with some friends by a stream, and he threw a rock at a bunch of salmon that were in there. And when he threw the rock, he slipped and fell down and hit his head. And he stood up and said, I think I hurt myself more than I hurt that salmon, and he died right there. So the friends of his actually got his body from Ketchikan, and he's buried at the Tacoma Cemetery off of South Tacoma Way. His body is up there. But an amazing man, very much an idealist, and on what he wanted to do. So along comes this Major Bowes. And Major Bowes was a kind of a radio personality. He started the first amateur hour on the radio. Now, 20, 30 years before that, though, he was a businessman in San Francisco, and during the earthquake, and there was a big fire there, and just a mess, and he and a bunch of wealthy people decided to come up to Washington and buy the city of Fircrest, the land that we had, because they heard this was probably the most booming area in the country when it came to growth and what was happening in the Pacific Northwest, and he wanted a piece of that. And of course, when you take that streetcar line from Tacoma all the way to Steilacoom, this was an empty track, and he bought it. And he said, well, this is where I'm going to build my own little paradise. And he called it Regents Park. And that wasn't his name, by the way. And now, he later went on to become the original amateur hour on the radio. And he discovered Frank Sinatra. He discovered Beverly Sills. Gladys Knight, 7 years old on the program. Ted Mack took over his program, and later Ed Sullivan took over that. And this is a little board game of Major Bowes from 1934. And when you open it up, you got the little thing here, and on the top, he would have the Wheel of Fortune that he would spin during his show. Round and round and round she goes. Where she stops, nobody knows. That was Major Bowes who said that. And the show Wheel of Fortune came from this. And if you weren't very good in this act, they'd gong you. He had a gong. That's where the gong show came from, was from Major Bowes' show, okay? So this is the guy that built and bought our town. Now, he was the financier and the promoter, so that was his job, is to promote the city of Fircrest. Now, he bought the land. Now, how are we going to pull this off? And you remember, this is 1907. His radio program started, by the way, in 1934. So this is, well, he was a young man during this time. And these are some of the things he did when he came into town. He built the Bowes Building. Anybody recognize this building? That's where the old Primo Grill used to be downtown on 9th and 8th Street. Beautiful building. But that was where Bowes had his headquarters. He never lived in Fircrest, by the way. A lot of people think he did, but we've never seen any documentation he actually lived in town. This is the Pantages a long time ago in the 30s. And right here, this is the Hotel Illington. That was the name of the woman he married, Margaret Illington, and he built her a building. She was a silent screen movie star and fell in love with her and built a building under her name. Only picture I've ever seen with Hotel Illington written right here, but that was for his wife, and that was downtown Tacoma. That was kind of interesting, I thought, too. So anyway, he came up here after that fire with his partners, Ira, Spring Street. We had Bowes, we had Irwin Drive, by the way, in town, we used to have, Irwin Drive was Orchard at one time, actually. Mildred was Anderson Pierce, so we had all different names. 19th used to be University Street, then it later became Columbia, so there was a lot of different names of the streets here then, and let's see, did I miss something here? No, I didn't. Okay. And these are sidewalk stamps that we have around town. There's probably 40 or 50 of these still around. And you see these on the streets, and you see the 1909 up on top, Edward J. Bowes. There's his company. And these are all over town, which are pretty cool. And there's quite a few of these. He sold the town in about 1910 to another company. That company, there's a marker on this street right over here, Pasadena, I think it is, that curves into Ramsdale, that goes up to the town hall by the tot lot. And there's a triangle there. And in that triangle, there's a stamp that says Tacoma Narrows Company on it. Only one I found, and it was the last street of town. We were developing and working our way, and they got the last street. He sold it. Narrows thought, hey, if we bought this for all this money, we're putting our own stamp there. And they got their one stamp. The only one I found that wasn't a Bose one. And they used to put these on all the street corners. On every sidewalk, you have the street, Harvard Avenue. You'd have Stanford. And there's quite a few of these in town, too. You go in the old section of town, you get to the end of the intersection, you'll see on the sidewalk written down there, you'll see these names on here, which is pretty cool. I wish we could go back to doing this. Wouldn't it be awesome just to do that as a policy and say, okay, Public Works guys, here's a set of letters, just put these in the cement and let's do this again, because I think it was really a neat touch. But anyway, like I say, and then what did he do with his investment? Well, he hired this guy, Matt Roy Thompson. Now, Matt was George Washington Thompson, the guy that founded University Place. That's his kid. And he learned a lot from his dad. I mean, his dad was a pretty amazing guy. And he thought, he taught him about landscape architecture. And they were from Riverside, Illinois, was close by where they lived. And Riverside was the first pre-planned community in the United States. And his dad knew very much about that. He was from Illinois, and he came out here, and he tried to do that with University Place, pre-plan it, but he died, okay? Didn't pull it off. And his kid knew all about this stuff, and Tacoma hired Frederick Law Olmsted, the guy that designed New York Central Park, the guy that designed Niagara Falls Park, amazing landscape architect. They hired him in Tacoma because Tacoma just found out we're going to be the terminus of the Transcontinental Railroad. It's going to end in Tacoma, the city of destiny. Tacoma is going to be the one. And they hired Olmsted to make it a showcase city. And he made what they called the Peach Basket Plan, where there was parklands dedicated, curved streets, everything kind of curved and merged. There wasn't a lot of intersections where everything get held up, and it's going to be a beautiful park like that. And he made this plan in 1873, and the businessmen didn't know what to make of it. You know, I just want a street. I don't care what you have. I just want it on an intersection, so I got two corners for my business. And well, it never happened. But here comes Roy Thompson, knows all this history, and he decides, gosh, we could pull this off. We could make a pre-planned community, and we can do this. So he sold the idea to Major Bose and made this plan. This is almost taken right out of that Peach Basket Plan in Tacoma. And look at the curved streets and these things that they did. And you remember where Vassar comes in, there's little stairs that come up to the sidewalk, and there's just all these things they did, and curves, and then build parklands, the whole lake here that they did. And Roy, as a kid, he lived over on by Lowell School, over there by St. Pat's on 21st. You know where that's at, coming on the way to Wrights Park there. But he lived there, and he used to, as a teenager, work at Wrights Park when they were building it. And a guy named Schwargel built it, and he helped build Bird Lake. That was a man-made lake in Wrights Park. He learned those skills to do our lake. That's how we built our spring lake here. He learned those skills while he was working for Schwargel, and he had that built into his plan. And he had all these things in there, which was really pretty outstanding to see all this stuff. But now, he graduated from Stanford University. That was actually, the campus was created by Frederick Law Olmsted, brand new school. He was the first class. Herbert Hoover was in his class. He was actually came in as an upperclassman. And he got into the first landscape architectural program from Frederick Law Olmsted, the legend. He built that campus, and that's where he studied before he got this chance to show Major Bose what he could do. And he was hired by Bose. He pitched this Regent Park plan. Why Regent's Park? Well, his dad was University Place, a board of regents like a college, University Place. Why did he make the streets after universities? Harvard, Yale, Amherst, Cornell. He wanted to honor his dad. He was at University Place. It's all about education and this kind of stuff. And he wanted to make sure that really got in solid. He wanted to really do that. So that was done. Also, Olmsted was really getting to be a pretty big name because they were doing the Seattle World's Fair. The Alaska Yukon Exposition was 1909. And Olmsted family was there building all the buildings on campus that became University of Washington. That's what it became. And they did Lake Walled Gardens, and they had a very strong connection. So they knew about what he was trying to do. And it was very egalitarian, right? He wanted to have parklands for everyone. Okay, we can all share it. You don't have to have the wealthy people going out into the suburbs and have these beautiful estates, and we'll build parks inside of the city, dedicated parkland, so everybody can enjoy nature and do this kind of thing. So, excuse me. So he sold this plan, and Bose kind of went with it. So the Narrows Land Company is who actually secured the land and sold, kind of were selling this stuff, and that went from about like 1907, 1908 to about 1918. And this was the entrance, and where it was at. And there's a little house right behind this little pillar over here. I think we can see it. This little house right here. It was a ceramic shop where they built little pedestals and nice vases they put on all the street corners. And they had all kinds of neat, and they had a greenhouse there. And Roy Thompson lived in that house with his family. And his house was across 19th. Now this is looking up Berkeley. And that's 19th. There's to be all the cars running by over here. And this was the entrance to the town. They had a wishing well right here in the middle. Okay, so that's where that was located. And his house was across 19th. And next to his house, okay, that's where the streetcar used to stop, by the way, was right at the entrance of town, right here. And here's a bunch of school kids here. And by the way, you've heard the name Alice Piers, right? Alice Piers Park. Okay, well, these are Alice Piers' daughters. Okay, and there's Dorothy. And this is Josephine, and here's a little Henrietta, okay, waiting there for their truck, their line. But this is where they would stop. And behind it, the Narrows View Company, you can see the little building where, where Roy lived. He had to plat a lot of the streets in town. He had designed them all, but on the other side of the street, he had to put him in too. And his brother came in to help him. And his brother, Paul Thompson, owns that house on the bottom of Princeton. When you come down the hill at Princeton, and you see that big, beautiful house down there? That's where his brother Paul lived. You know which one I'm talking about? Princeton Hill. And there's that beautiful house down there. So that's Paul. And Paul actually rented this house. The guy who actually built the house and owned these properties, his name was Saul Matheson. And he had quite a few houses in town. And he built some really beautiful places, but he got a little overextended. He actually went bankrupt and lost the homes. But Paul lived here while they were building. And he was in charge of designing the sidewalks and a lot of the streets then. So he did a lot of that work. And he was good friends with Gutzon Borglum. You know who that was? That sound familiar to anybody? Mount Rushmore? He carved it, okay? They hired him. He did all of our ceramic work. He built the pedestals, he built our vases, and he even put him in charge of making the two lions we have that were going to grace the entrance to our park. That was the Borglums. Now, this is his son Lincoln that helped him build the Mount Rushmore. He wasn't even alive at this point yet, but anyway, this is who he had help him do this. And while they were doing this work, and Roy, who was living over there off 19th, wanted to name the streets that were on his side of the street, on the other side of 19th. So there's his niece Pearl. That's Pearl Street. Over here, Winifred, that's Winifred Street. Shirley, that was another one of his nieces. Shirley Street's named after his niece. Next time you're driving down Pearl, maybe you want to think of that face, because that's where the name came from. Pearl Street was actually Roy Thompson's nieces that did that. So that's pretty cool too, when you think so. Anyway, so we have, this is a picture we have of the Thompson family. This is Roy Thompson, who built our town. This is his son, Matt. This is his son, Paul K. Thompson. Paul B. Thompson was the one who lived in that beautiful house at the bottom of Princeton. That was his uncle. And over here, this is little Mike, who was just here a second ago. I had him wave in the last group. Little Mike was here. That's Mike. And he's now, he was born, this would have been about 1957 when that picture was taken. But kind of neat to see the generations of the Thompsons. And George being in there too. This is the reason our community is as tight as it is the ideas these guys had and what they did to make that happen. So a very important part of our history is the Thompson family. Now the lions, you know, Gutzon Borglum, wow, he carved our lions. And Paul Thompson was really into Egyptian art. And he wanted these lions to look like Egyptian sphinx, and he had them designed. And this was from an article in the Tacoma Ledger in 1908, and they donated these lions first to Wrights Park. And the material he made the lions out of, it turned out when it rained, they started to melt. And they told him, I'm sorry, you got to take them away. And this was on the division side of Wrights Park. And these are the dancing maidens. Remember those on the division side? That was Annie and Fanny. Those are Charles Wright's kids. They moved them back and put the lions in there with this giant pedestal, and that's where they were. But they started to melt. They said, you got to get them out of here. So they put them in Fircrest. And they thought, where are we going to put them? Well, if you look across the park, right at that street there, that's Del Monte. On the park side, that's where the two pillars were, and that's where the lions were put. Now, I knew that because they've described it in the book, and I thought, no one's ever seen a picture of these lions. For some reason, they were just never, and they weren't there very long. Maybe a year or two at the most. And there were descriptions of kids that said they were as big as boxcars. They were huge. So, and this is Spring Lake then, okay, when they were building we're looking at the same angle right now out that window. That's exactly what you would see looking out that window in 1907, 1908. You would see that. And I'm looking at this and going, I like these little pagodas that they had around here. And these are tents where all the workers set up. Right across that hill line is where all the tents were, where all the workers came and did the work on Fircrest and made the streets and all that stuff. Here's their tents all right here. And this right here, these little things coming down with wood, this is a wooden water main wrapped in wire, and they had to go around corners. So how are you going to make a wooden water main go around a corner? Well, they would leave it on this rack and keep watering it until gravity just made it curve at the right angle they wanted. And that's how they made the pipes for our water system. Now, these wooden water mains with the wire wrapped on them, there's actually one of those you can see still. If you go on San Juan, which is next to Masco Park that our city hall is in, that little park there, and there's a little area there where they made some benches, a little walkway, and you take a couple steps up. You remember where that's at? There's a little vase and right on San Juan. If you go up those stairs, take an immediate left, you can see where they're coming out of the ground, this one of these wooden pipes. It's got a hole in it. You can stick a pencil in there and see how big the pipes were. They're probably about 8 inches wide. And it's coming right out of the old wellhead. And you could see it. There's a little box that's covered up with wood, and that's the wellhead, but that's coming right out of that. So, and I thought, wow, that is so cool. You know, I'm going to blow that up. I have these in PDFs. I've scanned them in a very high resolution. I'm going to inflate this up 800%, and I want to see them building that thing. And this is what it looked like right here. Look at this log. This great big water main, and look at the wires going around. And I was looking at this and going, gosh, that's right. You know something? That's just about where those lions would have been at the entrance. And, oh, look. There's the Fircrest Lions. The only picture ever gotten of the Fircrest Lions, they were here, okay? That's the only picture we have. That's exactly where they were located on that corner. And see all the vehicles here? There's little cars coming down Del Monte. That's them driving down the street right there, and that's right where the entrance was. And here's the pillars, because for probably 20, 30 years, those pillars were there. And here's a little manhole cover right on the corner. Okay, it's still there. So, and the same driveway is still there. If you want to go over there, they still got the driveway. It's still there. But that is the only picture to know, okay, those lions were actually here at one time. Pretty cool, huh? And we had them. China Lake, we've all heard about this place, yeah. Supposedly it was some kind of they said it was a material harder than cement, but it didn't take the water very good. So that's all they have is some material that didn't work, so whatever it was. I think it was kind of interesting that we had Borglin here. I mean, that's just kind of cool, making our stuff as a young man, but really cool. And we all heard of China Lake? Okay, and you know where that is, right? It's over on 19th there, just before you get to the freeway. There's China Lake there. And this hole they actually filmed many years ago. And we know that, well, there's a couple of interesting things. When you were building the city, and we were looking at Olmsted plans, you know, New York Central Park was just dirt. And they built all of those lakes. All of that is plumbing under the ground, miles of huge pipes and valves, and all of that infrastructure was done, tunnels everywhere underneath that park, and they built the park on top of it. And it was all man-made, okay? Same with our town. Look at the mains they were putting in for our water back then. Look at the little tunnels, people walking in and out of here. Okay, they did that in our town. There's an infrastructure that was pretty big. And a lot of these tunnels tied into this Chinese tunnel because that was where the lake was, and our stormwater would drain to that area across town, and that's where it would dump into where the China Lake was. So there's a lot of theories. We had one person that wrote in one of our newsletters that he was in those tunnels as a kid, and there was beheaded Chinamen in there, and there were swords and shackles and all this stuff. And Ron Hume, do you remember Ron Hume, anybody? He was a golfer in town, and Ron won the Club Champions of Champions championship one year where they had all the club champions play at the Doral Country Club in 1966, and he won that one, okay, the Club Champions of Champions. And Ron grew up in town right across the street from this, and he said, I played in there with my brothers all the time. My brother was 10 years older than me. We were always playing in those tunnels. I know every inch of that thing. There was no way that thing went that far, and there was no beheaded Chinamen and swords. I knew every inch of that place. We played in there a lot as kids. And the dare was to be in the tunnel when the streetcar went over on 19th, or on Regents. You had to be in the tunnel. So that was kind of the dare for the kids. And there is a room, and a woman here, one of the Herseys, was in the room. She was telling us about it. And it is. There was actually 3 rooms. There was kind of a bigger one. They had smooth walls. There were dishes in there, even some benches in there. And that went on for a long time. But our public works people, when they started looking at these tunnels, they actually tied in and used a lot of that drainage to come through and empty into Spring Lake for our water overflow and stuff. So I'm actually leaning more toward that's kind of what the purpose was. Now, we do know the China Lake moniker came in there somehow, and we know that there was some gardens there that were done by the Chinese, and they would irrigate and had ways to do that. So we know there was something in there. And also, remember in 1885, they ran the Chinese out of Tacoma, and some of them, I think, just came up here to hide and find a fresh water supply and a place they could just kind of wait till things blew over a little bit. So that might have been where some of that came from. And there's some other things, but I just don't have the time to tell you about them now. But you could see there were a lot of tunnels that run to the city here. And this is where it was. If you want to know exactly where the entrance, Ron Hume was so upset about that article that he said, I will take you where it is. And he walked me out there. And we sat at the edge of the parking lot over there. And this is that parking. This is 19th coming right here. This is Highway 16 coming around. So you know where the park is, right? And that's right where the entrance is, that hole right there. And there's a parking lot here now. And that's right at the edge of the parking lot is where the Chinese tunnels were. And Ron said, I'm going to get a hold of all my friends that were alive still, that were in those tunnels, and I'm going to say, write the whole description of what you remember about those tunnels, every detail. And he had 8 letters come. Well, one person was from Arizona. Remember, we had one from Montana, and they wrote up the whole thing about it. And I took the 8 letters. I read them. They all said the same thing. Okay, they didn't go 4 miles this way or that way. There were 3 little rooms, and they ended. And they all said the same thing. And I gave them to the city, and we lost them. No one's found the letters yet, so I don't know where they're at. But it was kind of neat that we had those, so we kind of know what was really going on then. But it's kind of neat to know right where those were. By the way, I found the opening. There was an opening that came up about 1988, 89. And I was up there in the blackberry bushes looking, and there was the hole. And there was a post, and there was some like chain link fence material covering the hole that somebody had bent, and it looked like it was an entrance. And I went, wow, that's the entrance. So I told my friend Eileen Lewis. Anybody know Eileen Lewis? Fire chief of the city of Tacoma. She became the fire chief. Well, she was still an officer then. And I said, Eileen, I want to go in there so bad. She goes, I'll tell you what, I'll sneak us a BA pack from the fire station. I'll get one for you and for me, and we'll go in there. We'll see. So, man, I'm all psyched up. Going to get the BA pack. And she gets in there, and all of a sudden that night she calls me and says, Ray Corpus, the city manager in Tacoma, just offered me the chief position for the fire department. And I can't do it. They catch me. I missed by like 1 day, of doing that. So I would have been the one to go in there, but it was very disheartening that we didn't get to do that. But anyway, kind of interesting. By the way, here's Shirley and Winifred. There's Pearl. Okay, these are the streets named after the nieces of that group. Now, here's another legend of town, Wood Freeman. Now, we got to kind of talk a little bit about Wood. Wood invented the autopilot. And do you know where his business was? Remember Columbia Bank? Next to it is that vacant lot where all the goats come and eat down all the brush and the graffitis all over the building. That's where he built the autopilots, okay? And that's Wood Freeman. And Wood came into our town, and during the Second World War, he was the head of the Civil Defense Department. Remember those guys that had the CD hats and they'd scream, "Lights out," when they do a blackout, and he'd get your fireplace off. And he was our fire marshal then, and did such a good job during the Second World War. They made him our first fire chief, so he was the first guy, Wood Freeman. And he was fishing off the coast of British Columbia when he was 1927, and he used to make money, and he graduated with an engineering degree. And he was just picking up some side cash there after he graduated. And he was pulling his block and tackle up to pull his net up. And it ripped through the net, hit him in the face, and broke his jaw. He broke his skull. He was really a mess. And he couldn't stand. So he was 400 miles in Gooseneck Island, or Goose something Island, over in Vancouver. And he steered his boat with his feet for 3.5 days on his back. And he steered it all the way to Nia Bay, where he landed, got to some help at the hospital. He almost died. And while he was laying on his back for 3.5 days, this engineer came up with the idea for the Wood Freeman autopilot. And I actually have an original one. His grandson restored for me. That's a Wood Freeman autopilot. And 90% of boats under 100 feet in length in the 1970s had a Wood Freeman autopilot. That was one successful business. And this is the poster he did at his conferences. I actually have the poster. The family gave that to me too. So it's just kind of a nice piece. But he was an amazing man. He built that at 342 Golden Gate. Right down the street is where the house where he built it. And in the basement is the bench he built this thing at, which is pretty cool. And right down the block, by the way, his daughter had a house, and he built an intercom from his house to his daughter's. And they still got the intercom in the kitchen where he could communicate to the house that was a couple of doors down. I thought it was cool. Now, he was very involved in the founding of the Redeemer Church. And this is Wood Freeman holding the shovel, and he turned the first clump of dirt when they built the Redeemer Church. And that's his family, and that was him when they got that done. So very active guy in the community, did a lot of stuff. His son, Dr. Bob, took over the business when Wood retired. And Dr. Bob was a pilot in the Korean War, and he was in the Night Flyers, this very dangerous group of pilots that flew night missions, and he was given the Distinguished Cross as a pilot, and he had his own plane, and he, of course, moored it at the Oswald Airport. You remember where that was? Oh, yeah. Yeah, right up on the other side of Regents. If you go up there across 67th or Mildred, that's where the Oswald Airport was. This was their mechanic, Doug, the guy standing there. He was the mechanic for the plane. And if someone had their autopilot go out, he'd fly up to Alaska and work on it with them. So, and they'd fly out of the Oswald Airport, which was right across the street from us. So anyway, very successful business. Kind of neat stuff about of that family. This is kind of when Weyerhaeuser came to town. They liked that Oswald Airport. They said, you know something? If we buy this land where TCC is today, this is my building over here, the Puget Sound Bank, and this is Whittier School, Wainwright School. Here's Pearl, and it's stopped right here on Pearl Street. That's Pearl. There's Alameda. This is 19th. It stopped here. This is all dirt. Okay, this is all where TCC. Up there, that's kind of on 12th. And probably this vacant area over here is where St. Charles is, okay? So, but Weyerhaeuser said, gosh, this is a perfect location for us. We could have our buyers fly in the airport. We could kind of, wine and dine them a little bit here in the airport cafe. You remember that thing? Right over, where's that at? Right up here. Here's the airport. There's the ramp there, or the runway, and they'd have the little restaurant on the corner. Little airplane cafe. Gosh, this would be a great location for us. So they wanted to build their headquarters here. But they needed sewer, they needed power, they needed water. And they contacted Fircrest and said, can we annex into your city? And Fircrest took a vote and said, yeah, we don't want you. That was the end of that. Okay, so they went to Federal Way and built their headquarters there. Okay, so now they have this big hunk of land, and we're going like, oh, what are we going to do with it? Now, Tony Shelton, who lived in town, remember Tony? Okay, and Tony worked for the school district. He knew the Weyerhaeusers. He said, hey, what are you going to do with that big hunk of land you got? Well, I don't know. Well, let's make a college, okay? Let's give something back to the community. He said, okay, well, that's a good idea. I'll put you in the committee, you put it together. And he put like Tommy Baker, remember Touchdown Tommy? He was one of the guys on the committee. Some other people were there, and they built the new college. And they were pretty excited. And of course, if you look at the way it was structured, here it is. This again is the Puget Sound Bank I'm at. Here's the airport cafe. Here's the Oswald Airport. This is the post office now, right about here. Okay, here's the runway. Took off right at the McDonald's. on the corner there, kitty corner from TC. And notice all the buildings, 1 story high, right? Why? Well, you don't want the plane to run into them. Everything had to be 1 story high. And that was our famous John F. Kennedy Community College. That was what it was going to be. So, and I think there's something wrong. How come it's not the John F. Kennedy Community College? Well, they're kind of sitting around there. Tony Shelton, they were going out to bid on the signage, the stationery, John F. Kennedy. And this is 1965. They're pretty excited. They're going like, man, this is going to be great. And somebody said, do you think there's a problem with the Oswald Airport directly across the street from John F. Kennedy Community College? And they all looked at each other and said, let's call it Tacoma Community College. Okay, all right, and that was the end of that. So started right there. So I thought that was kind of funny. Oh, then there was Dex. Dex Silver, what an amazing man. Dex was our mayor, very much a promoter kind of guy. And that's not a bad connotation. There's a reason why I call him Dirty Dex. But Dex is here getting our park back after Spring Lake closed. The coliform count got too high. Human waste was in the lake. Dr. Nace came and shut the lake down. So in the 40s, the lake was shut down. And then Metropolitan Parks took it over in about 1949, and they built us one of those little cement wading pools that they put in all the around the towns, and they built that for us. And we're paying a lot of tax revenue into this park levy, and we're just getting this little tiny wading pool, and they're going, this doesn't seem very fair. You know, let's get it back. So Dex lobbied and got Rossellini to sign over the park back over to us in 1959. And that was the year we put the bond together and built the rec center that we had, the swimming pool. I mean, the whole community just went crazy. And we spent more on our park levies than any community in Washington State. $10.60, I think, per 1,000 of assessed value was the highest in the state. And at one point, we had 44 acres of parkland in the city of Fircrest. Why? Because we're an Olmsted city. Olmsted was about parks. It was about designing the community and having places for people to go and interact with each other and build community. That's what was big for him. And about this time, when we got this to sign over, and we're building our brand new rec center and having our grand opening, we had to fill in a great big hole where this lake was. And Tacoma contacts his Dex and says, hey, Dex, we need to put a 48-inch sewer main right through your town, because if we have to go around it, it's going to cost us a lot of money. Can you help us out? We'll just put it right down Contra Costa in a straight line. And he goes, well, I'm not going to have you tearing up our streets. What do we get out of this? And Tacoma said, well, we'll give you a killer sewer rate. We'll let you tie into our system. It'll cost you pennies. We'll sign a 20-year agreement. So he signs the agreement for this really cheap sewer service, and they're going to put this main down. And he's looking at it as, you know, I got a big hole to fill at the park where that lake is at. There's a lot of dirt with this thing. Here's the rec center. This is them building it down Contra Costa, and he's going, wait a minute. So the first truck is leaving town with a big load of dirt, and Dex is out there flagging it down. Hey, where are you going with that dirt? That's Fircrest dirt. That's our problem. You can't take that dirt. That belongs to us. So you put it over there at the park. So they dumped it in here, and that's how we made our fields and played our fields, how we got them. And look at this here. Here's when we had our grand opening of the park. And this is when we had the big party and the celebration, our brand new building. And of course, we had the old hole with Spring Lake. And I'm looking back here at the Spring Lake and going, you know something? I'm going to blow this up right here. And I blew it up. And look at this here. Can you see these? These are all mounds of dirt from the trucks that they just kept unloading. And there's just thousands and thousands of mounds of dirt where they filled in the lake with the dirt from that sewer. So kind of a neat. Jerry Foss was here earlier. He goes, when I was a kid, there were thousands of those bugs. We took our bikes over, we'd play on them, and it was really kind of a fun thing for us. So that was kind of a neat thing to see. So Dex, pretty clever guy. Okay, got our park back, got all the bonds and stuff. He did the grand opening of the rec center, cut the ribbon, and he filled in the lake. So kind of a neat thing. Alice Piers, you heard of that park, right? Alice Piers. And you remember we saw her daughters at that streetcar. Okay, we saw Dorothy, we saw Josephine and little Henrietta, and that's Dorothy up there, and her daughter, and that's the famous Alice Piers. Not a whole lot of pictures. Are very active in the community. Her husband, by the way, was the grandson of the personal bodyguard for the Duke of Wellington. So they had a kind of an interesting history. And I think one of her daughters, I think, was married to J.A. Mason. I think this is the one I was telling you about. But anyway, Dorothy had the park named after her. And we had our first dedicated park in 1940. And she was very involved in the plantings and all that stuff. And they gave her the name of the park about 6, 7, 8 years later. They named it after her. But she was kind of an amazing woman. Now, she came up here to Fircrest from the San Francisco earthquake, same as Major Bose. She came up here. And her husband, during the earthquake, under gunpoint, was forced to fight the fire that they were fighting in the earthquake. They actually, by gunpoint, had him fight that fire when they came back up here. So it was kind of an interesting woman there, but we named that after her. Then there was Jonathan Mayhew Wainwright. Now, Alice Pierce's daughter, Dorothy, was very active in the city too. And this is her who organized having Jonathan Mayhew Wainwright. That's her sitting right next to Jonathan Mayhew. That was in 1949. And you remember we redid the school. It was just a big box. And in 1949, we thought, let's just rebuild the school. We're going to make it look like an Ivy League school. So they hired a company called Sterro Hansen, who built a lot of these prestigious university buildings at UW. They built Savoy Hall, they built those buildings, and they hired them to come and make our school look like an Ivy League school. We had porticos and big things, all this cool stuff. And Phil Hansen was Hansen Sterro. That was the kid of the guy who owned the construction company that did this. And Phil, who was a member of mine, worked on that building in 1949. That was a summer employment building on that. So we made a really concerted effort to make it look like an Ivy League school. And this is Jonathan Mayhew Wainwright, who was second in command during the Southeast Asian Command that we had during the war. He was one behind Doug MacArthur. And I remember when Doug MacArthur, they got him out on a PT boat, and he was the one who had to do the surrender. And he ended up in Corregidor and in a prison camp for 3 years. And they called him Skinny before he went in, but he was in the Bataan Death March. He did all that stuff. And this is 2 weeks after, this is on the 23rd of August in 1845 after they surrendered. So you can see he doesn't look all that good then, but that was him sitting there at the inauguration of our school. By the way, you know, our first City Hall meeting was in the original building of the school. For one meeting, we had it there. Then it changed to that church across the street from Wainwright, that little Methodist church. That was the headquarters of our city council for 20 years it was. And there's a beautiful plaque that Jerry Foss just built right in front of it. You haven't seen a big monument, and it's got the, 20 years, that was the city center. But anyway, that was kind of interesting too. So there he is. And we got some of the more interesting characters in town. That was Clyde Hobbs. Look at that guy. He did like a little gnome, kind of. And he was an amazing little man. But when I first came into town, I saw his car going through the parking lot with antennas sticking out of the hood and the top and the back. And he had a siren and spotlights. And he was kind of a volunteer police officer and had a reputation for discharging his weapon a lot. And we were at the city hall, back when I was on council, we were in the old city hall. He shot a hole in the pine wood walls that we had, playing with his gun. And the pine boards, when they tore down the old city hall, they gave each of our council members a little tree commemorating the old city hall out of the paneling. And Viafor goes, I want my tree to have the bullet hole from Clyde Hobbs. And we had that hidden with a picture on the wall. I think he's got the one with the bullet hole in it. And there was rumors that he had one in the hood of the top of his car also. And there was supposedly a story of a young kid throwing like water balloons. And he took off running across the park, and Clyde went after him and fired a warning shot at this 11-year-old kid throwing water balloons. So I don't know if he was probably the best guy to trust with a gun. But we called him Clyde the Cutter because he was the barber. We had Bob the Butcher, that was Bob Witzel, and we had Clyde the Cutter. Those were the two barbers in town. And he was a volunteer police officer and firefighter, so if the call went and he's in the middle of a haircut, you got half a haircut. You know, he'd come back and do it later. And I was doing and he also played Santa Claus every year. You can see his build. He made a perfect Santa. And we called him Santy Clyde. Everybody called him back then. But this is actually the building where Hawkins Poe is now, just by the swim shop where they sell the hot tubs and stuff. So you know where that's at? Yeah, kind of on Regents there. Yeah, so that's kind of where that is, where that florist used to be a long time ago. But yeah, just a real interesting character. His house was just about a block up the street up Electron. You take a right on Berkeley, and there's a little house kind of tucked in way down low there, about the second house in. It It looks like a little tiny house back there, but that's where Clyde lived. So, but I had a Fircrest Jeopardy game back in 1996 that we would play, and we'd have 3 people running for office play. It was just like Jeopardy. We had all the categories, and I was kind of the host of the show. And whoever won, the Civic and Heritage Society would endorse them in the election, because we figured, well, they know the most about the history, and we give them all a book, and everybody would study, and we do it. And one of the categories was Fircrest businesses. And the question was, what business in Fircrest was represented by Clyde the Cutter and Bob the Butcher? And everybody starts laughing. I go, what's so funny? And this old man in the front row goes, I'm Bob. And I went, oh, gee, sorry, Bob. I didn't know he was still alive, so that was kind of embarrassing. But anyway, yeah. And then we have Sam Hoskins Baker. Love that name, Sam Hoskins Baker. He was an amazing football. Now, I don't know why this city doesn't do something to help him. He was the second all-time scorer in NFL history when he retired in 1969. Only one person in those 100 years of pro football, or 50, I don't know, 60 years, 70 years of pro football, second all-time scorer in the history of the NFL. Only Lou the Toe Groza had more points than he did when he retired in 1969. Now, he went to Stadium High School, and he actually transferred down to Oregon his senior year. And he was on the state-winning team in, I think, football at Stadium. He went to Oregon. He actually ended up at Oregon State, and they won the state championship in high school in basketball, and he made the all-star team in 2 different states, which is kind of unusual, a kid that could do that. But anyway, Sam went to Oregon, had a very successful pro career. When he got drafted, there was only 33 players on a pro team back then, and you didn't have kickers back then. Only 33 players. You have offense and defense. You had a couple of people to fill in. You couldn't afford to take one of those precious spots and make a field goal kicker or a punter out of it, okay? So everybody dual role. George Blanda used to punt and quarterback, and Lou Groza was an offensive lineman who did the kicking. And Sam was so good, they drafted him as a kicker. He was the first really position player to play. And Sam, second all-time scorer. Alex Karras wrote a book called Even Big Boys Cry. And he wrote a passage on his last season playing in 1969. And he says, I really hard to remember it, but I remember the game we had against the Philadelphia Eagles on Thanksgiving Day in 1969. Sam kicked 4 field goals against us. I remember the rain, the mud, the quagmire, and Sam, with those high-top shoes, kicked those 4 field goals to beat us that day. I felt like I was seeing a part of history. That's the one thing I remember, and he wrote that in his book. And Sam was an amazing player. 110 straight games he scored in, 110 straight, okay? And he came to Fircrest, and we had him at a deal, actually it was in our old rec center, and we had famous athletes from Fircrest here. We had Kenny Still and all these different athletes. And we asked Sam, what was your greatest rivalry? And he goes, well, I got a little upset with this one. I was a punter, and Dick Butkus was coming in the lead. And we knew he was a pretty mean guy. And I get the punt, and I see him breaking through the line. And I knew I could get the punt off in time. So I kicked the punt. And as he runs by me, I said, missed me. And Dick Butkus grabbed that one bar I had in my kicking helmet and turned it 45 degrees so my nose was sticking out the ear hole. I think he broke my nose. My chin strap flew off, and I can't see, and I don't want to move it because I think he broke my nose. It hurts. It's stuck on my head, and I had to get myself back to the sideline. He said, he was a very mean guy, Dick Butkus. So I thought that was pretty hilarious. We all had a pretty good time with that one. So, and this is Sam coaching a group of the young kids in Fircrest right when he got done in 1969, and he lived right on Brentwood, which is if you go up Electron across Alameda, and there's a little cul-de-sac back there. He lived right back there in the first house on the right, where Sam lived. And Sam was playing in a baseball game out here one time, and he was in the outfield, and somebody hit a line drive outfield to him, and he ran up the field and went between his legs. And the backup fielder got the ball and threw the guy out at home. And Sam was so upset that he missed this ball, and so they went up to bat, and he's the next batter, and where's Sam? I don't know. Anybody seen Sam? They see his glove out there in center field. He threw his glove and stomped home, just took off home. That's just the kind of way Sam was. But he worked out at my gym for quite a while. And this guy deserves to be in Canton, Ohio, really. And he played with the Washington Redskins. He was a Pro Bowl guy 6 times. Okay, he played with Tom Landry, and he didn't like Tom very much because he was kind of authoritarian. But he went to Philadelphia, and he had the Dallas punting record for 44 years at 45.4 yard average per punt. He had that record for over 40 years, okay? So this is a legend. He's right here in Fircrest. This is one of our guys, okay? So that'd be really fun to get him in that Hall of Fame. He's definitely worthy. Okay, here's Gordy Pfeiffer. I imagine you know a lot about Gordy. Gordy was the world's best handball player, probably best in the world in 1971. And his rivalry, when we asked him, was this guy named Paul Haber, who drank and smoked and never exercised, but the guy was just too tough to beat. And Gordy just would kill himself trying to beat this Haber guy when he finally won his world championship. But Gordy also was the MVP of the National Softball Championships, batted over 800. And he got a tryout as a pitcher with the Seattle Pilots the first year they started too. So he's also a scratch golfer. He golfed to 74 at Meadow Park recently. He's like 86 years old, 87. So Gordy, amazing athlete. He played basketball at UPS, did a lot of different sports. Very coordinated guy. And he was doing a kind of a banquet celebrating famous athletes nationally. And Jimmy Zorn he got to know. And Jimmy Zorn calls him later on and says, hey, Gordy, I just got drafted by the Seattle Seahawks. I'm going to be their new quarterback, and I got to find a place to live out there. And Gordy said, why don't you come and live with me? So he lived in Fircrest for the couple of weeks that he was looking around, finding a house for Jim Zorn to live in. Do you remember Bobby Riggs? You remember who that is? Played Billie Jean King in tennis, you remember? And well, after he lost, he was pretty humiliated, right? Billie Jean King took it to him pretty good. But he challenged Gordy to a game of handball where he got to use his tennis racket and Gordy had to use his hand. And they're going to play a 2 out of 3. And Gordy said, I beat him pretty bad, okay, the first game. And he goes, okay, look, obviously this isn't working. How about we change the rules and we use a tennis ball instead of a handball? And Gordy said, you know, that was a lot harder, but I still beat him pretty bad. So there's a lot of those kind of stories in Gordy's past. So just kind of a really, and he lives up on Altadena, still going strong. So Gordy Pfeiffer, amazing guy, what he's been able to do in his lifetime. By the way, he is now in the, UPS Hall of Fame. He's in the Tacoma-Pierce County Hall of Fame, Washington State Hall of Fame. He just made the National Hall of Fame. So he's in every Hall of Fame you could have. So another great athlete. Armand Yappuccino. Armand lived, if you go down Princeton, all the way to the end, it runs into Harvard. And there's this weird little utility thing there where it's grass and it goes up the hill up to Orchard. But that's where he lived, up there at the top of that. And Armand, when he was building his house, had to put a sewer in there. So he's digging this trench up the deal. But he had to work. So on Sundays, he'd be out there digging. And they pass an ordinance. You can't work on Sundays in Fircrest. That's a day of the Sabbath. So he was a little upset about that the day when I talked to him about it. But Armand ran the like a boat building and kind of a lot of craftsman type stuff at Bates. A lot of the kids did their schooling with Armand. And he built the Joya Mea. It was a hydroplane race. I think it's Carlson or something like that, or Carlberg was a famous hydroplane maker, and he made this hole for him. And this boat won the national championships, the Joya Mea. It's a very well-known boat. A lot of people still know it that are in hydroplanes. And his son, Neil, on the national points race in 1977, they won it, and his son crashed the boat and died. Neil died in that boat. And Armand put that in his house, and he put it in the garage and kind of an angle to fit it in there. And it was in there like 20 years, kind of a shrine for his kid. And then after about 20 years, he pulled it out, put a cab on it, got it dried, and it took second at the national points race. So very, very fast boat. And Armand was a real character. He was our mayor, a lot of stuff. And during the strawberry feed, we always have the council people help with the serving. And he always did the whipped cream. And he'd dump the dollop in there. And then when no one was looking, he'd lick the spoon, take all the stuff off. And we'd say, Armand, you can't do that. He'd go, oh, it's okay. He'd grab another one. And, oh, geez, yeah. But Armand, he was just a really sweet man. Very, very nice man. Dr. Buell Seaver, remember his office? This is across the street from Viafor's Deli. On that corner there is that house where Buell Seaver was. And Buell was a doc in town. And Buell was 96 years old when he was in my club. He worked out at my gym in his 90s. And I remember once I saw his Social Security number, and it only had 3 digits in it. That's how old he was. So he's a really, really old guy. And anyway, I'm just kidding, by the way, it wasn't that. But Buell was our doctor in town. And he admits I wasn't a real good doctor. And then one day he told me, I don't know if you know this or not, but I was the personal physician for the Nazi war criminals where they were being tried in Nuremberg. I was the only person they were allowed to talk to and work with. And these are all their signatures that I kept. and there's Rudolph Hess on the top there, and he says, I was their personal physician for those guys, and I got to know a lot of them pretty well. And he told me stories about them, and I'm thinking, wow, are you kidding me? And he goes, yeah, how did you get that gig? And he goes, I was last in my class. I go, what? He goes, yeah. I said, we're not going to waste a good doctor on those guys. You're last, you're going over there. So that's where he ended up getting there. So, but I think he was kidding me, but that's what he told me. So, but Buell had a beautiful house up on Sunrise and Claremont, kind of up there. And it was designed by Robert Merrill Jones, the famous architect. And this is a house on 326 El Dorado. That's a Robert Jones house too. So we had two of them in our area. Buell is just on the other side of the town boundary. He's on the opposite side of Fircrest side of the street, but it's an amazing house. And Robert Merrill Jones was a great architect. I met the people that owned this house and gave them a picture of it. They had no idea this house won a bunch of awards in 1954 in Sunset magazine, and I gave them a picture. And the woman that owns it's named Surina, so it's easy for me to remember now what her name was, because that's my name, so that was kind of neat. But really kind of a pretty neat thing about Buell. Then there's Kenny Still, the golfing legend. Okay, Kenny, everybody knows Kenny had an incredible memory, and just what a funny guy. And he, in 1969, won 3 PGA events, the Citrus Open, he won the Milwaukee Open, and he won called the International Tournament, sponsored by Michelob Beer, but he won 3 of them that year, and they had him on the 1969 Ryder Cup team. And that year in the Ryder Cup, the British and the Americans play, and it was very contentious for some reason, a lot of fighting going on, and it was pretty vicious. And they said, we're not going to help you don't help those Americans find their ball, they were just being real mean to us, and we were being mean to them. And it came down, it was so close that Jack Nicklaus was the last guy in, and if he made his putt, it was a pressure putt, if he made it, it was guaranteed a tie, they wouldn't lose. And Jack made this pressure putt and sunk it. And the British guy had to get up to do the final shot, and it was only about a 4-foot putt. And Nicholas grabs the chip and says, you don't need to putt it out, you got it. And Kenny went ballistic. Oh my God, you gave him the putt? And Kenny swears it was 7 feet. I've read every newspaper account I could find. It says it was a 4-foot putt. But Kenny says, no, it was 7 feet, and it was tricky too. And he gave, he just went unglued. He just went crazy. And they get in the locker room afterwards, and he's screaming, and he wants to fight Jack, and oh man, they're holding him back. And finally, he gets over to him, and he goes, Jack, why the heck did you do that? Why'd you give him the putt? And he goes, very quietly, he puts his head down and says, I didn't want to embarrass him in front of his countrymen. And he said, well, he didn't have any problem embarrassing you. He made you putt, and he's got to yell at him and stuff. And, well, they ended up patching things up pretty well because later on, American Lake over here wanted to build the second 9 holes to their golf course. And it was going to take some money to do. And Jack Nicklaus designs golf courses. So Kenny asked him as a favor, would you do this for our vets in our community and build the 9 holes for us? And he designed them and did that for Kenny. So pretty nice guy. Now, Dave here's dad was Marv Harshman. This is Dave Harshman. And he was working with Kenny one time on the golf course. And he says, hey, why don't you get over here, Marv, take a couple swings for me. And he swings and he goes, geez, would you teach your basketball players to shoot a free throw without a follow through? What's wrong with you? So he kind of gets them to follow through it. What did he do? About 3 or 4 shots right down the middle of the fairway, 200 plus yards. So he was a great coach, I guess. He was a very good teacher. So, and that Ryder Cup team, you can see he was a pretty competitive guy too when he competed. But that was Kenny Still. We do have Kenny Still Day in town. And he used to bring in celebrities all the time. At my gym, he brought in Sandy Koufax when he got married. Okay, he also had oh gosh, who were all the guys he had here? He had a banner, Koufax, Chichi Rodriguez he brought in. Who else?
Lee Trevino.
Lee Trevino, right, the big banner with, that in there too. So.
When we had the exhibition at Fircrest.
Yeah, he brought in those guys, and he has a lot of stories. You know Kenny. So.
Yeah.
And then there was Michael Scornienci. This is an amazing guy. Michael was a personal watercraft racer, and he was second at the World Championships twice. And he was always consistently for years placing right at the top in Australia. They'd have the World Championship. He was always right there. And one year, he lived right on Ramsdale, just 3 houses down from Alameda, down Ramsdale, on the left side of the street in a greenhouse. And the Scorcher, they called him, because they mispronounced the word Fircrest. Over there, they called it Firecrest. They thought, Firecrest, Scornienci, we'll call him the Scorcher. Okay, he's from Firecrest. So that's how he got the nickname, and it stuck. And he was in a race, and he crashed very badly. And he would have died. He was paralyzed from the neck down. And a 15-year-old kid jumped out and swam out there and saved his life. And he became very close to this young man who saved his life. And they kept in contact with each other. And as the kid grew up, he became the world champion in personal watercraft racing, and he was the guy that kind of mentored him along. So, and Scornienchi's wife, by the way, is a very accomplished equestrian. She just won, I think, a national championship, or very high nationally. So, and they're just a wonderful family here in town. And he did have almost a complete recovery. He had a surgery that completely changed what happened with this paralysis he had, and he's now starting to get some of this stuff back, and he's actually starting to race again, I think. So, amazing guy. I'm trying to maybe suggest him for our Hall of Fame for Tacoma Pierce County. He'd be a good candidate for that. Then we got Debbie Miller, just had her 50th birthday last night. May 12th every year we have Debbie Miller Day. And Debbie with her wife Erica are expecting a baby here in about 2 weeks. And this is Debbie with her mother, Linda. Amazing athlete. I met her first. She has the school record at Seattle Pacific University in assists. They went to the national championships a couple times. She was the team leader. I have a video that I was going to play for you today, but I can't get to show on my computer, where she made a full court shot in her junior year of high school. To throw a basketball, the full length of a basketball court and make a shot, that's absolutely amazing. And it was an ESPN. If you put YouTube, 1993 Wilson High School full court shot, you could see her shooting that shot. Absolutely amazing. Now, Debbie came to me and worked out from the time she was 14. I've kind of been her mentor. And one day she comes up to me on a Friday and says, "Hey, Blake, do you know how to throw the javelin?" I go, "Well, yeah." She goes, "I used to be the district champion in college." She goes, "Well, do you think you could teach me how to throw one?" "Well, sure, let's meet tomorrow. We'll throw a little bit." She goes, "Well, I'm in the state track meet tomorrow, so I can't do it then. But can we do it tonight?" And I go, "What? You play soccer. How did you? That's the same season." She goes, "Well, I know I made all-city team in basketball and volleyball and soccer, but the track coach asked me if I could throw a javelin, so I went in the meet and I threw 115 feet, and I've qualified for the state championship." So I go, "Well, I guess we got to go now." So I walked over to TCC, and she didn't even know how to hold it. She's holding it like a pencil, going like, "Oh, geez." So I teach her how to hold it, and we just, what are you going to do in 1 hour? She got the track meet. So I just said, "Let me just help you get your steps so that you're comfortable with the steps, and we'll just work on the release." The next day, she throws 137 feet, took 4th at the state championship, second time she ever threw a javelin. So amazing athlete, and everything she does, she's just magic. And John Cheeseman, our old chief, used to always get a call, "Hey, there's a fight going on down there at the rec center," and it was usually Debbie fighting with some guy who's some big basketball guy who gets the ball and just backs her down to the rim, backs her in, then turns around and shoots the shot. And Debbie's like, "Well, I'm not going to let him just muscle me around and do that, so I'm going to beat the crap out of the guy, So and you can't do it." She's just mauling him and stuff, and there comes a fight, and sure enough, the cops would come, and there'd be Debbie out there in the bottom of that thing. But absolutely amazing, amazing athlete. She's now the athletic director at Jason Lee Middle School, which is now called Hilltop Heritage. Back when I was there, we called it Jason Lee, and we called it JL for short, because that's where everybody went when they graduated, JL. I know that. It was a tough school back then, but we used to take our yearbook photos straight on and profile when I was there, so yeah, we were tough. Yeah. And anyway, Debbie is the athletic director there and won so many championships that you can't even count them. But just an amazing role model for the young people today and some of the stuff that goes on there. I think that the last thing I kind of wanted to show you was this guy who's been doing these posters in town. Have you guys seen these? And pretty amazing what this guy's doing. And I brought a couple of them just to show you. And I think what's kind of interesting to me is what this guy knows. These are some of these posters. And he just hangs them in town, this artist. And he says, "If you see one, feel free to take it. It's yours." Okay? And I'm only going to make a limited amount. Once they're gone, they're gone. And he's put quite a few of these together, and he must know the history. Look at some of the stuff he did. Here's the Fircrest traction line. That's the longest streetcar in the world. 2 of our borders are on that line. That thing started downtown Tacoma, came up 12th, it cut over on Orchard to 19th, and that's one of our borders, down 19th to Mildred. Then it turned on Mildred, went down 27th to Bridgeport, and all the way down into Charles Wright and down the hill. But this guy knows that, right? This artist that we have, he doesn't want anybody to know his name, and he hangs this in there. It's beautifully done. Look at that, 12.2 miles long. Look at this one. Here's the Oswald Airport. Obviously, he knew about the airport. He wrote a little poster, "Fly, fly, fly." And it's about the Oswald Airport. And you're going like, wow, that is pretty cool. This guy knew about the history of the Oswald Airport and put a poster together. Look at this one. Who knew that Thomson's tiny tweak would tilt our whole universe? Thomson being Roy Thomson, the guy who built our town, the guy who did the Olmsted Plan. Remember, he put 5-foot radiuses on all of our street corners. It wasn't straight curves. There's no straight lines in nature. It's all curved. And here's the 5-degree radius for the sidewalks. And you remember I was telling you about the sewers that went under our town? Well, when they put sewers under the streets don't have to be higher than the yards where the water would drain and they wouldn't get muddy. He had a sewer under there, so he could put the streets much lower in like Harvard and that area, and the yards overtake the street. So you see nature, you see trees, you see green as you go down there. That wasn't done by accident. That was done on purpose. And he put those drains in there, and that's why the curbs are only 3 inches high instead of 6. Okay, and our streets, they're not straight in a grid. They come through rolling down the hill and tie in. Well, you still got to tie into Center. You still got to tie into 27th. So we have the formulas of how to make the curved street and how to make them land in the right spot. Here's the formulas. So who knew that Thomson's tiny tweak would change the universe? Well, that's somebody who knows that. Isn't that cool? Okay, and look at this one. Pardon?
Are you the secret artist?
I wouldn't say that, no. I wouldn't be self-promoting myself if I were doing that. This is one that I don't know if you saw this one or not, but this is Mary Lund Davis. Now, she's a Fircrest resident, and she was the first woman to graduate from architecture school at University of Washington. First person, and she built a house in town that's 800 square feet. We call it the tree house. And she was experimenting with plywood when it first came out. How to build a house with plywood sheets and storage and cabinetry, and how do you make something just beautiful with this plywood? And she was an absolute genius. And she built a house on 137 Del Monte, and it's for sale right now. Someone's got about 540 grand, you can get it. 800 square foot house, little tiny house, and he knew that. And here's Mary Lund Davis, and look what he wrote about this. If you get the chance to see the house right now, it's just beautiful. He says, they say it was 800 square feet, but numbers lie, because it breathed like a cathedral. A house, yes, but more like a spell, cast in plywood and poured light. She didn't follow rules, she redrew them. The first woman to walk out of that UW program, post-war, blueprints in hand, heart full of no one's done this yet. She built with silence and sharp lines and a wild belief that a home could be humble and holy. That beauty doesn't need a driveway or a dining room. That future could fit just fine in 800 square feet. So when you wander down Del Monte Avenue, stop. Let your eyes adjust. Let your breath catch. Because right there, half hidden in the trees, modernism got soft edges. Architecture learned how to sing. And a woman with a pencil changed everything. That's our artist who did that. Isn't that amazing? Beautifully done, okay? So I just think it's really awesome that we can have a community that does that. And hopefully you all know where we get our information from for our history. We have the first book. This is the definitive book of Fircrest history. You haven't seen it, of Lions and Dreams and Men and Realities. It goes up to 1976. It's a very, very well done book, and it is probably the definitive text for our town. Now, after 1976, we built the second book, that covers from 76 on, and this was by Allison Sontag. I think I even got to be a co-writer of this one. But this is, and we're not nearly as good as the first one, but it's there, okay? And then we have the Ralph Collier book, right? These little books that we see that we have for Fircrest. I got the wrong one, I got University Plate, but Ralph was here earlier. He was in the show before this one. So Ralph has this one. And these are probably the three main works we have. Now, I have a very close friend who probably knows more about the history of Fircrest homes and residents than anybody, is Mary Pierce, who's sitting right here. And Mary and I are probably gonna work on something like this. And she knows more about the city of Fircrest residents, early residents especially, and homes than anybody in the history of our town. So she's a very good resource for us if we ever need some stuff that way. And did you see some of these other posters? So far there's like, how many are there? About 15, I think. And if you go into that little room, when you come into the rec center, they're all framed above all in order, each one of them, so you can see them all. This is the one I'm trying to find. If someone's got a lead to that one, I want the Keep Fircrest Trippy one. And I don't want to have to take acid to do that. So if somebody's got the poster, I'd love to have it. So, well, hopefully that was kind of fun for you. Go through those. And got to learn some new stuff. Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Thanks, guys.